Um, as an elementary school student, well, first of all, I was born in Beaumont, Texas, but I was only 6 months old when I came to Los Angeles, where I grew up. So I definitely consider myself a Californian, an Angelino. My first experience with school was at basically an all-white elementary school, public school. My brother was the first Black there, and the principal really sort of gave my mother a hard time. She tried her best to block him and tell him there was another elementary school close by that he could attend. And my mother fought it through the school system and won. And so it was a different kind of beginning. But by the time he was 5 years older than I was, so by the time I got there, I was basically naive about race. You know, there was one other Black girl in the school, and a couple of Japanese Americans, and everybody else was white. And it seemed normal at the time, but it turned out to be different in some ways. My Japanese neighbors were born in what we call the relocation centers. Those relocation centers with guns pointed inward, and a few other special things, but we didn't call ours concentration camps. Their parents, therefore, wanted them to keep in touch with their Japanese culture and language. So they took, besides going to the same elementary school, they took Japanese language courses in every Saturday in Japanese school. And you're wondering, why is she telling me this? Well, because they were sort of my introduction to knowing how much I loved languages and cultures. I studied with them, so they had to do their homework before they played. So I would do it with them, and we started out with counting ichini, sanchi, go, rokushi, and ohio gozaimasu and different expressions, until they finally told me that when their parents came in, I needed to shut up because if I pronounced better than them, they got in trouble. And I learned that I had a facility for languages, and I enjoyed that, and it's continued throughout my life. And I was 11 years old when I went to junior high school. And for those of you too young to remember, it was junior high school, not middle school. It was 7th to 9th grade. I was 11 years old, and it was my junior high school was diverse, culturally diverse. There were a lot of Black kids there, and I got teased and bullied. They said that I talked like a white girl, and was hanging with whites and Japanese, because these are the people I went to school with for 6 years, and the only ones I knew when I first got there. And so even though people that know me now probably won't believe it, but I was very shy. I was very shy and didn't know how to handle the bullying at first. But then two things happened. I started learning to what we call now code switch. I learned to talk a different way, to have a different body language, and do whatever I needed to do to fit in. It worked to an extent, but I still got bullied until finally in the 8th grade, I decided to confront my tormentors. And I had never fought physically, but I was a tomboy. I was, I wasn't a weakling or anything, and I prevailed. And that caused a whole different, certain people change their personalities over time. Mine was almost like overnight. After that fight, I was a different person. I had a lot more self-confidence, and and also my group of friends changed, and I started appreciating more about who I was and what I was about. So when I went to high school, the high school was predominantly white. It was very diverse, LA High. But I guess the determining factor for certain of the things I encountered was because I was into two sports, neither of which there were a lot of Black people involved. And one was tennis and the other was swimming. And so I did have to confront some little bit of racism in both. Not so much the tennis. So I should say that the instructors in both cases were phenomenal. They were wonderful. But for tennis, instructor put me together with a partner from Eastern Europe. She was a new immigrant, and we were in the city competition and went all the way to the finals, which was held at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, which at that time admitted no Blacks. But of course, they couldn't deny me because I was coming under the auspices of LA Unified District. And there were about 36 teams, that were competing, and we got all the way to the finals. When my partner and I took second place, they had a little semicircle, and the Times newspaper was there covering it, and people there watching. And the president of the LA Tennis Club took everybody's hand but mine. And I was 16 at the time, and it did really impact me. And I stopped playing tennis for 15 years. But that was during the 60s, and the saving grace for me is that, for those of you that remember or learned it historically, that was the big time for civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and I was really into it. And I started, I was militant, like a lot of it. So, I had a big afro. I started being very self-confident and whatever. So that didn't change my personality. It just made it stronger. And I went to college. My first school, I wanted to get away from LA but be close, and I went to San Diego State. And this was at a time when the lieutenant governor was Stanley Mosk, and he decided that any fraternity or sorority that had a racial clause in its constitution not allowing minorities would not be on campus. Well, in San Diego, the reaction was that they all went off campus and protested, and there was a lot of racial tension. And in the midst of that, some of the Black students had always met during lunchtime. We were having this big conversation about race and civil rights and everything. And then somebody brought up the fact, well, it was not just race. The Africans don't like us, and they never intermingle with Black people, and they're treated differently. And so a whole conversation ensued. And one of the guys said, I'll prove it. He said, if you guys promise not to recognize me, I will come to the same lounge tomorrow as an African. We said, okay. And he did. The next day he came completely dressed differently, and he walked in and he just stood at the door. And it didn't take 5 minutes for this white girl to jump up and introduce herself and ask him to join their table. And he had this fake accent. He had made up a name, and he was from Nigeria. And we're just sort of cracking up, saying, let's see how long it takes to kick him out or whatever. But it really backfired on all of us, because what happened is that he got so far into it and got invited to homes and was treated, very well. And, they had discussions, etc. And then he decided he had to transfer because, he did not want to get caught in his own deception. But he also told us, we met at different places so they couldn't see us together I say we, it wasn't just me and him, it was several of us. He said, well, the truth is that I met some really nice people that I think were sincere, and maybe we should rethink certain things, or have a different approach. And that left, I transferred away from San Diego State. I only went there for a year, but it did leave some questions in my mind. And then in my sophomore year, I went to Paris. I was always a French major and a Spanish minor, and I got a chance to go to the Sorbonne in Paris. And that's when there were some things that really changed some of my perceptions. For one thing, even though my high school was integrated, socially it was not. I don't know how many of you remember, if you're from LA, that white folks listen to rock and roll, black folks listen to rhythm and blues, and there were two different stations. They're separate stations, and there was some interracial dating, but very little, and it was sort of on the QT. It was not like it is today. But in Paris, you might be hit on by anybody, whether they were Asian, white, black, whatever, that surprised me at first. Also, I went to a dinner one time, and this guy kept staring at me, an African guy from Mali, and he kept staring, but he never said anything. I felt it was so creepy to me. He didn't hit on me or anything, but I was like, what's this about? Well, about a week later, I saw him on the street, and he stopped me and he said, first of all, I want to apologize, for staring at you. He said, he pulls out this black and white picture of somebody that looks so much like me that it just, oh my God. And he said, that's my mother. He said, she passed away 2 years ago. He said, I couldn't say anything. I would have sounded so phony. And, I just wanted to wait till I could show you the picture. And he said, she was Pearl. Lina, you relate to that. That's, one of the West African tribes. And he said, you just look so much like her. I didn't know what to say. And I didn't either. I was like, okay, I understand. And we became friends. And I realized how ignorant I was about Africa, about African cultures. I asked him once where he was born, and he told me Timbuktu. And I said, oh yeah, right. Like there's a Timbuktu. He pulls out his passport and says, there is Timbuktu, and there's a whole history of Timbuktu and what it means. And he said, you are stupid. He said, no, you're just ignorant. And I, at that time thinking, I was always a good student and everything. And I thought to myself, yeah, I guess I am so ignorant. So I started trying to learn a lot more, especially about the African cultures. But there was one thing that really sort of stayed on my mind. About 7 of us that were all studying French met in a cafe, and we're just talking. And I was a typical American high school student at that time. We took identification pictures in the fall, and we would trade pictures, buy extra copies and trade with our friends. And so I had this fat wallet with all these pictures, and they asked if they could look at the pictures, and I said, sure. And when it got to this one guy, he said, oh, these 2 pretty girls, are they sisters? And I said, I don't have any pictures of sisters. And I said, pass it back around. And I looked and I said, no, this is Sylvia and Faith. They're not even related. Sylvia's Black and Faith is Jewish, white. And all the heads snapped, like, and they said, what? And I I said, yeah. And then this German girl pipes up and she says, oh yeah, we studied about it when we were studying American slavery. She said the slave masters came up with this concept that if you had one drop of black blood in you, that makes you black. She said, of course, it's not considered that. Biologically, it makes no sense. Nobody else in the world does it. The Americans still follow that rule. I was sort of speechless because I never thought of it as something that was the legacy of slave masters. You know, I knew basically, but I just never thought of it like that. And then I started getting peppered with questions, so much that I was like on the defensive, and they were saying, well, how is that possible? What happens if an Asian, a Japanese marries a white? Are the kids Japanese? And I said, no, they're Eurasian. I said, so it's recognized with other races, but just not if you're black. And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. And then they were asking some other questions. Well, why? You know, unless you get ready to talk. Why somehow I disappeared. What about in terms of the African guy that leaned across the table because he was about 2 people from me. He said, do you consider yourself black? And I said, well, yeah, of course. And he put his hand next to mine. He says, this is black. You're mixed. And I said, well, most Black Americans are mixed. You know, there was a lot of rape going on, you know, and I'm like trying to explain, but I'd never thought of myself as mixed. And after that conversation, oh, by the way, Sylvia and Faith I've never seen again since high school. And Sylvia, I just hooked up with about 3 years ago after 40 or 50 years, you know. But I never forgot that conversation or who it was about, because it really made me think and, you know, do some research and some, you know, introspection about the whole idea of race and how we define it. But anyway, later on at UCLA, when I tried out for the swim team there, the coach actually pulled me aside and asked me if I could swim, if I knew how to swim. And you know, by that time I was bold and sassy and everything. And I said, no, sir, but I plan to walk across the water faster than the other girls. And he said, you're a smart ass. And I said, how many people have you asked that are trying out for the team? And he just didn't say anything. Fortunately, I did make the team and I did well. And his name was Buzz Bear, and we got along fine. It didn't leave any lasting effect, but you know, I imagine it could have. Another thing that happened that sort of expanded my horizons is that I used to have a lot of parties, and at one of those parties while I was at UCLA, you know, everybody was dancing in the living room. Some of us were in the kitchen talking about politics and race and the whole bit. And there were these 3 guys that wandered back, and they were sort of listening to the conversation. And then one of them decided to say something, and we noticed he had an accent. And we said, hey, you're not from here. He said, no, I'm not. We said, why haven't we met any of you? You know, why is this the first time we're seeing you? He said, because when we came, we didn't know anybody. And the only people that we met at the beginning were from the Foreign Students Welcoming Committee, UCLA. And they were all white. So no blacks were there. And then we didn't know how to meet anybody. And until finally this guy in our class said, you know, black guy said, he said, how do you meet people, especially girls? He said, oh, this girl named Judy is having a party tonight. I mean, or over the weekend or whenever it was. And here's the address, you know, just go. And they said, but in our orientation to American culture, it said that you never go unless you have a written invitation, and the written invitations will tell you the time it starts and the time it ends. And he said, oh, that's for white people. We just go. You hear about a party, you go. You know, you either get in or you don't. And he said that they were so afraid when they came. And I opened the door and I said, hey, you know, welcome, you know, come on in. And so, you know, it started this whole conversation about why aren't any Blacks going to the welcoming committee, or, you know, and we started realizing that it was a two-way street. That a lot of us did have this idea that Africans didn't want to deal with us, and that they were, you know, they looked down on us, et cetera, et cetera. But all of this, for me, helped form a lot of the ideas that I've had now for years, in terms of communication and understanding other cultures, and where our definitions don't necessarily fit in the worldwide context. The other thing that helped, well, you know, this is a sort of an aside. This was 1965, right after the Watts riots. UCLA started what they called the Jordan Tutorial Program. Jordan was the one high school in Watts at the time. And I volunteered to tutor. And fortunately, I met some of the most dedicated, incredible students ever. Had no intention of ever being a teacher. I wanted to be an interpreter. But working with these kids changed me completely, changed my trajectory. And I decided to teach high school, which I did. I taught 9 years at Dorsey High and 3 years at Van Nuys High. As an aside, at Van Nuys High, again, I don't know how many of you know this or experienced it, but in LA Unified, they did start the busing program, but they also decided that they would transfer teachers, you know, and so they sent some of us of color out to the Valley. It had very little color. And they sent some of the Valley teachers to Los Angeles, you know, the inner city. Well, the two of us, there was an English teacher named Lee Bird and myself. And there was one Black teacher on a faculty of almost 90. And he also taught French, and he had gone to UCLA. I knew him from UCLA. They wouldn't even let us in the teachers' meetings. You know, they had the union meetings, and the first time we went, they said, "Do you have your card?" Well, nobody carried their card, so they wouldn't let us. So we decided, okay, next time we'll have our card. So we did, and then there was a meeting where they were discussing helping the woman, as they called it, the poor woman who I replaced. She had been sent to Manual Arts High School. And she was the first one to file a suit against LA Unified for doing that. And I raised my hand and they wouldn't even acknowledge me. And finally I stood up and said, listen, you know, and they were saying in front of me, and then they send us inferior teachers, you know, to replace our good teachers. And I said, listen, she also went to UCLA, and I will, you know, bet my career on you can test me in written, grammar, speaking, ability to transfer that knowledge to students, you know, in any way you want. And there is no way that I will come out on the bottom of that comparison. You know, they were all shocked, you know. So, the other thing at Van Nuys High School is that they actually put letters in our teachers' boxes, and nobody from the outside is supposed to be able to do that. An invitation to the Valley Ku Klux Klan meeting. And so, you know, it was a different kind of experience, but it turned out to be a very good one. The students were great, you know, it was fine. But at that time I was finishing, I decided, I left out one part. Once they started making the class size so big that especially for foreign language, this wasn't practical. And piling on extracurricular duties after one after another, I decided it's time for me to leave. And I enrolled in law school at night. I was a single parent with 2 small boys. And so when I was at Van Nuys, I finished law school. And so I actually resigned before I took the bar. My family thought I had gone crazy, because there's no guarantee you'd pass it. But luckily I did. Then I went into law and ended up hating it. I did family law and estate law. Really, I said I'd be an alcoholic if I stayed there. And I saw an ad for the State Department, and I said, okay, this is exactly combining all the things I'm interested in. I can live abroad, I can practice language, use the languages that I've learned, have the experience of learning other cultures, etc. So that's what I did. I became a diplomat. I ended up in that career for 24 years, of which 22 were lived overseas. I lived in Mexico, France, Zaire, which now is the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ghana, Senegal, Central African Republic, Togo, and Jamaica. And there's so much that I learned about the culture and about U.S. politics. That will be a session in itself. I'll just tell you this much. Although I knew that the CIA worked through the State Department, it wasn't until I got to Zaire where a good third of our embassy, I learned later, was CIA. And we kept Mobutu in power for something like 40 years, and he was brutal. It was, anyway, that's for another session. But this is basically to say how, because of my youth and the things that I'd gone through, and then the first exposure, the real exposure in Paris of being in a different culture with different attitudes, that was expanded even more by my State Department experience, because both as an official of the US government and as a private citizen, I got 2 separate views of several things. And also, I haven't mentioned much about my personal life. My first husband, we were divorced. And then years later, when I was in Paris, in my first assignment in Paris, I remarried, and my second husband was from Togo, West Africa. And even though that marriage didn't last, we're still friends. We still communicate and everything. But I am eternally grateful for that experience, because while living in Africa with him, I was exposed to a lot of things that most of the people from the embassy were never exposed to. So these are all things that I will incorporate into future sessions. And I would like to know right now, take a pause and say, what questions or what issues people would like to bring up. Are there any? I'm looking at the chat now. Motown versus beach music, yeah.
No
Yeah, that's true. KRLA, KJLH, yep. Speaking of KJLH, the founder of KJLH was a neighbor of ours, and that's why he named it. His name is John Lamar Hill. That's the origin of that. Welcome to those. Okay. Carmen, yeah, okay. So I do want to ask a few of you a question. Do any of you remember when Tiger Woods first came to be known, that he never identified himself as Black? identified himself as biracial. And at the time, several people from the Black community were very upset about that. Does anybody remember that? Nope. Okay, somebody did. And what, I mean, now, of course, since then, there are a lot of attitudes that have changed, partially because there's a whole group of biracial kids and adults that are saying, whether you like it or not, I honor both of my parents and I am biracial, but I'd like to know your reaction. Is that a hand up? No. Can anybody give me any reaction to the whole movement of acknowledging oneself as biracial rather than Black?
Godfrey and Elaine, you can go ahead.
Pardon?
Oh, I see Godfrey and Elaine's hand up.
Okay, can you
want to say
unmute?
anything?
I had my hand up for another reason. I didn't know Tiger Woods didn't really say he was a full Black person when he came out. He went to Stanford and he was there for just a short time, but he always thought himself as being biracial. I had problems with that because this is all during the time, it was after the 60s, I'm so sure. I think my son was he going to Stanford then? Right before. Yeah. And so it was after the civil rights 60s and things were changing a bit. But when we were in the 60s, you wanted to be Black. You didn't want to be anything else because that was a popular thing to do, to be. And and it was more that you wasn't put down as much by being Black. So when Tiger Woods came out and such a force he was when he came out with the golf thing, and he didn't want to identify as Black, then he sort of put a negative thought in my mind for his Tiger Woods. Yeah. And I guess, I never looked at it that his mother wasn't Black and his father was Black, so he wanted to identify.
His mother was Thai.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess we're looking for heroes back then, and also who were Black heroes, and somebody who didn't want to be identified solely as Black sort of came up negative to me. But I kept his history. I looked at his golf and everything else, and things sort of changed because I think the social point of view changed, where they didn't care whether he wanted to be biracial or not. He was considered Black, So
yeah.
I had a question for you before we get into that too much. You said you went to LA High, right?
I went to LA High.
You played on a tennis team, and you went to the.
I'm sorry?
You played on a tennis team. You went to the city tournament?
Yes.
Okay. I did too, but I didn't go to LA High. I went to Fremont High. Okay. Yeah.
You went to Fremont High?
Yeah. And it was very few of us that got to play in the city tournament. When we went there, we played LA. LA was in our league.
Oh yeah, Southern League.
Yeah, Southern League. So we played LA. I went to Fremont in the late 60s. In my senior year was 68. And we played my senior year, and we actually me and my partner beat LA High's partner, doubles team.
In tennis?
In tennis, so the first team.
Okay.
But when we got to the city tournament, we played against people like Birmingham and some of these teams from the Valley and whatnot. And we were so psyched out because we only had started playing tennis in the 10th grade, And so we got there, and I think we psyched ourselves out, when we played against them. But I was pleased to hear that you guys came in second. That was good. And you said you went to UCLA, and I went to UCLA for a while too. And I remember the parties. The parties, it's like, where's the party gonna be at this weekend? That's how the word went around. Yeah.
You might have been at some of my parties.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have a lot of them lived in Arlington near Pico.
Okay.
It was a pretty big house, so I would just let everybody in.
That's where the fraternities and stuff were too. The Black fraternities was in that area.
What did you say about the fraternity?
I think the fraternities were in that area too, down Crenshaw and some of the Black fraternities.
Yeah.
Yeah, around that area too.
Yeah. My father was a Kappa. My brother's a Kappa. I'm a Delta, even though not an active one.
Mhm. Well, I enjoyed being on the trip to France with you. We went to
Yeah,
Paris.
it was certainly a learning experience for me.
Yeah,
Does
yeah.
anybody else have any comment? Or I'd like to ask,
Well, that's fine.
okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I remember when Tiger Woods came out and said he was biracial, and I was really offended by it because I believe in the one drop rule. But times have changed now. And like you pointed out, there's so many children that have a parent of one race and a parent of another race. And the way I look at it is different to say, like my last name is Pavageau. So obviously either the slave master was from France or somebody was. So if I said, okay, I'm biracial because I did my ancestry and I got certain percentage French, that's different than a child that's growing up in a home and their mother says from Mexico and really from Mexico, they was born there and their parent is a Black person, Black African American in the household, because that child really is growing up learning about two cultures and each is a part of that child. So if that child said they're biracial, they're trying to get it straight in their mind, who am I?
Yeah.
As opposed to somebody reaching way back in their ancestry, like 5 generations, trying to find something other than being African American. So I look at it differently in part than I used to, and partly because during the transition, I moved to Cerritos, which is right next to Cyprus, where Tiger Woods grew up. And I see, like in my neighborhood in Cerritos, everybody was related to the same, every Black family was related to the same family. They were all related to each other, except for us when we came to this neighborhood. So the kids were interacting with almost all Asian families, basically. And the whites and the Latinos, they had as few as they did of us Black people. So I could see Tiger growing up thinking that, whereas my kids, when I brought them to Cerritos, we came from Inglewood and they were like older, middle school age, the 2 oldest ones, and they went to Frank Perrin all Black school. So they were grounded, and that was their only culture. Whereas he grew up out here where he was just a complete minority and he was with his mother most of the time, who was Thai. So it's gotten a little mixed up over the years. And I think as long as the person understands all of their culture, they're blessed to have more than one culture, I guess, and honor it.
But my family is sort of strange, although now there's so many families that are mixed and whatever. My oldest brother studied in Mexico, went to the University of Mexico to do his master's. He was fluent in Spanish. He was, very much in the Mexican culture. He married, and his wife came here. And unfortunately, when he was 29 and she was pregnant with the second child, he died. He had a heart attack, no no warning or anything. 29 years old, he was dead. 6 years later, she remarried, and her second husband, who didn't last long though, was from West Virginia, red hair, blue eyes. They had a daughter, and he ended up having a real drinking problem, and she put him out, just put him out of her life completely. So my third niece, because she's the only family, Angelica had no family here other than our family. And so she grew up, even though she doesn't even look like her mother, she just looks just like her father, like she's a white girl. And she used to say when she was little, that when she got bigger, she'd look like her sisters. And we'd say, no, Elizabeth probably won't, And she went through a lot of adjustments because, she thought she was black. And there's nothing about her that looks black at all. I mean, and if there's any mixture, it's with Indian and, on the Mexican side, but it doesn't show. So it wasn't until I got to Africa that I wrote her a letter saying, guess what? Now that I'm in Africa, I found that I'm white. That'll be a subject of another session. But, and now she's perfectly comfortable with all sides of her background, because she grew up in a black family, speaks Spanish fluently, but looks white. So she's a nurse at UCLA, and so they're always amazed when they need somebody to translate that she's the one that comes. So we live in a very different world from the 60s and 70s.
But I think it's important that we don't, put ourselves last as African Americans. Like my grandchildren, I have 5 of them, and they're all half Mexican and half black, basically. And I'm teaching them their colors.
Mm-hmm.
The youngest one, I take care of her. So she says orange, yellow, blue. And every time we get to black, I taught her to say, black is beautiful. She says it every single time. So in her heart, she knows, she'll be proud of, we're beautiful people, we're blessed. And she is black, and she does have, she is Mexican too, in a way. So, well, I guess she is. And it's really hard to explain to young children mixtures of, because you don't want to put down one side and bring up the other.
Right.
You want them to realize the beauty of all cultures. And you and Delina and others that have majored in languages and cultures, you understand it's not a competition of the languages or the cultures. There's beauty in all of them.
Yeah. And I think one of the things you said that I certainly agree with is there's a whole difference between those that want to look way back to the great grandfather and claim whiteness or whatever, versus somebody that grows up with 2 parents that love them, that they're involved with. And I thought it, even earlier, well, not until sometime, but I always thought sort of unfair to make them put down and not recognize a parent that they love, and not participate in both cultures. Because, I know, we went through the whole thing of Black Pride, and, the 1% rule. What I do think the 1% rule is stupid. Now, I don't think that we can ever change it in the United States, because so much depends on it right now, and funding and all kinds of things. But I'll tell you 2 incidences that really influenced me is that, one time in Brazil, and this was on vacation, I was on this boat, and these 2 ladies kept staring at me, and I was like, oh. And so I decided, I speak some Portuguese, and so, I went close to them and then greeted them, and we started chatting, and one of them said, I'm sorry to stare at you, but there was a reason. And she said, you look so much like our grandmother. And I said, they just look white, And so she said, this is one thing I don't understand about you Americans. It turned out that the one sister didn't speak any English. She only spoke Portuguese. The other sister spoke English, and she said she was back home, but she lived in Texas, and she was married to a Mexican. And she said, I'd get so angry. I have a picture of my family, my extended family, on our fireplace, and mantle anyway. And she said, and my grandmother and grandfather are in the center of it. And those people ask me if that's my maid. And she said, it just angers me so much, because it's our family goes from, we're all colors. And she said, I don't care what color or how a Brazilian looks, we are all mixed. We're mixed with Black, Indian, and white. And we don't try to categorize it or put people in we don't take racial surveys. We don't try to. She said we do have a problem with color consciousness. She said some people do. She said, but for us, it's not like putting somebody in a category because of your ancestry. So for what such works, that's happened to me twice. The other time was in Cuba, and it was the same thing. The white-looking guy said, "We're all mixed." Period. We're all mixed. It's just a matter of degree. Yeah, Peggy, you were about to say something.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really relating to your conversation, and I'm a Delta too. I think we grew up around the same time, only I went to Centennial and I went to Pepperdine. And I can remember the African students we didn't have that many Black students on campus at Pepperdine, but I remember them kind of making like they were better than us. And, it's like, well, you all were slaves. So wait a minute, I work on that story. But I think it's that divide and conquer. Just listening to the last part of the conversation, first of all, we're all human beings. We all bleed red. And I think when we get off of this color thing and race thing, we'll be a lot better in this country and in this world.
Yeah.
I guess now I'm looking, I have to work on me. I'm a work in progress. Because I grew up when you did.
You grew up what?
I grew up the time period you did, and
yeah,
knowing, and then even spending time in Maryland, 30 years in Maryland, where I was one of few in the classroom and being ignored and all of that kind of thing. But just wanting to have a better society as we experience people. How do we make it? How do we create, in our attitudes about, just like Kim says, she teaches her granddaughter that all of her is good, and I do like the Black part, and that we just need to promote that we're all humans and we all bleed red. And that's, but again, good to see you, Sarah. I like the conversation.
Yeah, but we have to keep up the culture and the pride in it. Denise, did you have something? Is she the one without the mic?
Just quick, I was just going to make a comment. My last, David and I went to Italy. And when we arrived, we had the next morning scheduled, and on this tour.
Hey, you're breaking up. Breaking up. You might want to go back.
Hold on. If you can hear me better now, I took the video off.
Okay.
Anyway, we were in Italy, and the person that was taking us on the tour looked very suspect in terms of, was she Black, was she white, and so I asked her. I said, where are you from? Do you have any Black African in you? And she said, listen, in Italy we are all mixed. She said, many of us won't admit that, but in Italy we are all mixed. And she said, mixed up because they have a lot of Africans in Europe, particularly that area of Europe. And so that was interesting to me because I never thought of Italian as being mixed like that. And so that was very interesting too. And then I thought about it, actually it would be true for Kim and Godfrey and I, because we all share the same great grandmother. Our father's maiden name, great maiden name was Angeletti, an Italian name, So it's interesting to think about racial mixtures, especially here in the United States, because everything is so racialized and has been so racialized for our country's entire existence. And so it's interesting. It's also interesting. I'll do this. Being someone who's often mistaken for not being Black, and they're different experiences you have as a result of that as well. That that make you, I don't know, very angry sometimes, very pro-Black at other times, and maybe even going overboard at times, just to make sure that you're recognized as being someone, who is Black because you're proud of your Blackness. So I look forward to your discussions, Judy, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, okay. I had a play aunt that lived till 103, died last year, and she looked white. You know, she's not. She was not related to me physically. You know, but she used to be always upset because her husband, when they got married in Los Angeles, she was a nurse, he was a doctor. They wouldn't give her the license until she proved that she was Black. This is in Los Angeles. And so she brought her degree from Spelman, and had to prove that she was Black. And then to go to nursing school, she ended up having to go to Canada. You know, so there, you know, we have all kinds of crazy things in this country because we are racist. and I'm using it in the pure sense, saying, you know, there are negative racists that hate other races, but all of us in the United States judge things based on race. We categorize people based on race. And I don't care if you're Black, white, Mexican, or whatever. We've been taught to, look at somebody and say, what are they for real? What is their background? What, to try to put them in a category.
Go ahead, Pearlie.
Yeah, just thank you. Glad to meet you, Judy.
Okay, well, I think it's about time.
Thank you for this. I just want to say a couple of things about having been raised in the South. My family is very biracial, even in the South. But in my family, we have a lot of biracial mixtures and marriages and things like that, and never really gave it a thought. It wasn't for any particular reason. We just happened that way. But I was just remembering you were talking about the attitudes of people in the South. It looks like that, from my standpoint, everybody was trying to compete to show that they're just as good as well. Well, I'm Black, but I'm just as good as you, and that was a driving motive in a sense. To do it just as good, like we're trying to prove something, which was exactly what we had to do in so many cases to be accepted or recognized. And I wonder why. That's why are we trying to prove, but probably because of the advantages that are given. Nobody wants to be rejected, and all the propaganda, the politics, especially in our country, to make Black something that's bad, and nobody, even a little kid, wouldn't want to be associated with anything that's bad. They would choose the white dolls over when they started, and when they did start making Black dolls, they weren't very attractive, so they wanted the white dolls, and it's almost like it's indoctrinating. It's teaching our kids that this is the best thing here. So when they see Black, there's a hesitation with it. Muhammad Ali had something. He said something about everything Black being associated with something negative. Tiger Woods, I understand him totally, because he has his mother's just as her particular ethnic group. I don't like to use race for some reason. Ethnic group as his father, and he didn't want to dishonor. He did say that he didn't want to dishonor his mother, recognizing her, and vice, and also for his father. So I could understand that very, very well, and so I don't blame him. It's like almost like everybody that's Black seem to have an obligation from the Blacks themselves. They expect them to represent and be upholding the Blacks. But I think they should have a choice in that, and we should respect those choices if they don't want to do that. We criticize it. I did too at first. You didn't want to be Black. What do you think you are? You're just as Black as I am, and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to add that it wasn't that organized, but I had a lot of notes jotted down here that I can relate to what you're saying. Totally.
Yeah, I'd like to quickly add one thing. When I was teaching high school at Van Nuys, I had two girls that in my class, one who was obviously Black, one who, could be, there was certain indications. And I had to take, like all the teachers, we had to do these racial surveys. I don't know if they still do those, probably. But I would just say to the kids, listen, we have to do this racial survey and I'm going to let you determine what you are. So these are the choices. You raise your hand, you know, if you identify with that, and if you want to put and can't say or whatever. You know. So when I said white, the girl that seemed like she was mixed raised her hand, and the other black girl, now she was from the valley, okay? The other girl was bussed in from the inner city. And this other girl looked at me like, she didn't say anything. So later on, when I was passing out papers, he said, Miss Francis, did you actually put her down as white? And I said, yeah, that's what she raised her hand. And she said, you know, she's not white. And I said, it's not for me to say. And then at the end of the class, this girl came up to me and she said, Miss Francis, you did that racial survey. And she said, I'm not sure whether I should have raised my hand as black or not. She said, we have a big picture of my grandfather over the mantle, and he's Cuban, he's black Cuban. She said, does that make me black? And I said, well, in this country, it makes you consider, you know, they'll consider you black. I said, but in this country, it's a social definition. It's not a biological definition. So you have to decide whether, you know, I said, obviously you've never been around, you know, the rest of your family's white. You haven't been around blacks. You know, you've always lived in the valley, you know. Sooner or later, you will have to determine how you define yourself. I said, I personally don't let other people define me, even if it's, you know, into society. But the very fact that you're asking, you know, is a good sign. But with that, I think we should close. We're about 4 minutes over.
Oh.
So thank you for participating. And
Yeah.
Thank you.
next time around, you know, I'll have some visual things and to get a bit more into the living abroad.
Okay, I know Gloria had a question, but Gloria, if it's okay, if you can put it.
I'll do it next time.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Thank you.
Gloria.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Okay.
And if we can just give her a quick hand. Thank you, Ms. Judith. This was a fantastic presentation. We look forward to the next in the series, which is going to be on March 1st. So if you guys can come back, it's the same link, same access. You can access it from your email, from our Google Calendar on the OLLI website, and the catalog will be online as well, so you can get it from there as well. So thank you, everyone, for attending today. We appreciate you. Have a good day.
Thank
you,
Carmen,
everyone.
I need to hear from you.
Vanessa, is the next class going to be in person or is it going to be